This is Pavlov, and one of what I like to refer to as the big three of competitive military shooters that the original PSVR simply never got. Those three would be Onward, Contractors, and of course Pavlov. First hitting the VR scene in 2017, Pavlov has been many players' go-to shooter for many years, and now PSVR players get to join in on the fun. Stick around guys, and I'll let you know if this was worth the wait. Hey guys, it's Chris from the VR Grid, and welcome to the channel. If you like this video, give it a like for us, and if you're interested in more VR content from us, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss new videos as they drop. And if you're looking to join our VR conversations, feel free to leave a comment, or even better, join us each and every Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific here for the Virtual Boys podcast. I do love me a realistic military shooter both in and out of VR. So back when all I had as a VR headset was a PSVR 1, I can admit I was very jealous of the option PC VR players had for popping brain bags. The way it was always explained to me was that Onward was for hardcore players, as its heavy focus on teamwork, strategy, and realism made it a military sim of sorts for the Arma type. Contractors was the Counter-Strike of VR, and Pavlov was more for the COD crowd who wanted something a little more casual and run and gun. Now, playing and enjoying all three, I would absolutely agree with those descriptions. Pavlov on PSVR 2 is essentially the base PC VR version of the game as it is now, minus the mod support that has kept the PC version going as long as it has. But more on that in a bit. In fact, the PSVR 2 version is actually crossplay with the PC version, unlike the Quest version. Jumping into the PSVR 2 version and looking at what content is on offer, I want to make this very clear for those looking for solo play. This is not the game for you. Clicking on the offline tab and we see a variety of modes, all of which are great and highly recommended for players looking to learn the game and its guns, but little else. I say this because despite the inclusion of some of the online game modes in the offline section, the AI here is simply far too dumb to keep anyone very interested. In fact, it's likely just to simply frustrate, as the game modes, including the COD-like zombie mode, simply doesn't scale for single player, and as a result will likely steamroll new players with an onslaught of stupid, yet in numbers lethal enemies. Personally, I found this very disappointing, as I would have loved to jump into a terrorist hunt mode or a zombie match and just have some fun. However, this was not the case. In fact, even playing co-op with a friend, we simply found the zombie mode was just too much for only 2 players and really only worked for a full team of 4. Additionally, for those who love the zombies mode in Call of Duty, this is a poor imitation with little strategy other than surviving and trying to find the mid-level weapon stash before the timer runs out, something which I found almost game-breaking in some of the larger levels. And I gotta say that for a game that has been around this long, to not have the game modes scale properly for single and co-op players is really quite sad. That being said, online multiplayer is what Pavlov has always been about, and players looking for that will find a lot of modes to choose from here. Of course, all the staples are here, from deathmatch and team deathmatch to seek and destroy, gun game, and of course online zombies. However, there's a bunch of other modes, some of which don't even show up in the game's mode filter list. This was actually really frustrating, for if you don't know what, for example, TTT is, the game does absolutely nothing to explain to you what that mode is, how to play it, or what its rules are. And for the record, TTT is essentially Among Us in Pavlov. Of course, you can jump blind into a match and figure out what the mode you're playing is, or ask someone, but you shouldn't have to. Even the loading screen fails to tell you anything about the game you're about to enter, and it's this vagueness and feeling of being unfinished that plagues Pavlov, as much of the game's UI and menu system is simply bare bones. Matchmaking is underdeveloped, not allowing players to party up and join matches together, and instead must try to join on each other before a match fills up. Additionally, nowhere is there a menu listing all of the available weapons, attachments, or their stats, and there's no ability to create preset loadouts. Instead, the game simply throws players right into a match and gives them a simple weapon wheel for which to quickly select amongst the available weapons, attachments, consumables, and armor. And this often done live. A real pain in the ass, considering the game's respawn system is very hit or miss, and often, depending on the game mode or map you're in, can spawn you right next to enemies while you attempt to give yourself anything other than a pistol. Available weapons and gear are purchased, so you're limited by the funds you have on hand, which are earned based on performance. A system which I found pretty weak and only really felt appropriate in a handful of select modes. This made me desperately want a proper loadout screen to gear up before jumping back into the fight, not to mention some kind of a progression system in place to entice me to keep grinding out matches. Unfortunately, Pavlov has none of this. Now, going back to the game modes again, Pavlov has a lot of possible game modes, enough to keep players interested for a very long time, even including the ability to operate World War II tanks, though unfortunately I could never find a match to try this out for you guys. However, without the PC mod support, Pavlov on PSVR 2 has only 10 maps, and though these 10 maps were designed well enough, and offered some nice variety in size and gameplay style, I did find myself wishing for a bit more map variety. Unfortunately, it would appear that developer Bankrupt Games has relied on community-made maps over on PC, and as a result, the PSVR 2 version does feel a little anemic with only the base game maps at launch. Thankfully though, the developer has said they're looking into options to bring some sort of modded content over, but no word on when that will happen or what it might look like. Now, where Pavlov definitely brings its A-game on the content side of things is on the weapon side, offering up an awesome selection of handguns, SMGs, rifles, shotguns, along with some bigger stuff too. A while back on PC, Pavlov also added in World War II era weapons, so those also make an appearance here on the PSVR 2 version. Additionally, weapons can be manually modded with new sights, grips, and suppressors. Never goes as deep as the weapon customization seen in Onward, but it gets close. And speaking of weapons, while Pavlov may play like a run-and-gun shooter, its weapons and gunplay lean much more into the simulation side of things, and it's better for it. New players or those looking to try out new weapons are highly recommended to spend some time in the game's shooting range, learning how each gun handles and reloads. For example, belt-fed machine guns must be manually fed, and revolvers must be loaded one bullet at a time while being pointed down so the bullets don't fall out. Something I found out the hard way. Personally, I absolutely love the gun handling here in Pavlov, short of one exception, as for the life of me, I cannot understand why Pavlov insists on making the non-dominant hand use the trigger button for grabbing clips and chambering a gun. Okay, I can understand chambering the gun, I guess, in order to avoid accidentally grabbing the gun, but grabbing ammo feels so damn unintuitive, especially when no other game does this. Of course, as is par for the course with Pavlov, you can't change this to your preference. Another thing you also can't change, and for some this will be a deal breaker, is that Pavlov can only be played standing. There's no option for seated play and no crouch button either. And unfortunately, unlike Meta and Steam VR, Sony hasn't included a height adjustment option, so for those who can't stand to play or simply prefer not to, the developers of Pavlov don't seem to care. You need to play it their way or not at all. Now, I can understand Onward, a hardcore military sim, taking this approach, but after a few minutes of open chat in Pavlov, and you will know that hardcore Pavlov is not.
Alright, pass it to them. Pass it to him. Pass it. What the? I put a bullet in here. Oh, shit!
I mean, come on. Players who want to play seated are only at a disadvantage to those standing, turning, and crouching, so why not let them play the game the way they want? I know I'm coming off a bit whiny here, but for VR in 2023, this is unacceptable. Now, all that being said, standing up and getting fully immersed in Pavlov is undeniably a blast. In fact, that's probably why it irritates me so much for it to be so antiquated and unfinished in other areas when it feels so awesome to play. Player speed is good here, with running being possible when your gun is lowered, keeping matches moving but never feeling like an arcade shooter either. Like I said, crouching must be physically done and there's no jump button, though vaulting over things can be done by simply walking forward over them. Weapons aren't easy to shoot either, and players must get good, learning the maps, their guns, and watching their corners. A little persistent does pay off though, and once I found a few guns that worked for me, Pavlov's Punchy Gunplay really started to click for me. Weapons are loud and kills can be very bloody, giving Pavlov a definite visceral quality that I didn't get from games like Contractors, Onward, or PSVR shooters like Firewall and Alvo. This fun, weighty combat is made all the more potent by Pavlov's excellent use of the DualSense controllers and head haptics. Guns really kick here with the DualSense, and the weighted triggers feel different depending on what gun you use. In addition, the game's use of haptic triggers also communicates to players if their clip is empty or their gun isn't charged, as the trigger goes completely loose. PC players might not like to hear this, but the controllers are a game changer for me here with Pavlov, and if the PSVR 2 version gets mod support, this will be the version to play moving forward. This is an easy statement to make, as visually Pavlov on the PSVR 2 is right on par with the PC version, running at max settings, offering console players sharp visuals and a silky smooth frame rate with no discernible reprojection. Now, to be fair, Pavlov's base game levels won't win any visual awards as they're simply serviceable, coming off a bit lifeless and bland at times. This isn't helped any by the fairly meat and potatoes lighting system that really doesn't go above and beyond the essentials. That being said, gun models look awesome, as do character models, who surprisingly animate very well, often looking more like something I would expect from a AAA shooter than your average VR shooter. Like I said, Pavlov may not be a graphical showcase, but it absolutely nails the shooter fundamentals. Sound-wise, I already established that it knocks it out of the park when it comes to weapon sounds. This can also be said for the way the game handles spatial audio, as gunshots and footsteps are replicated here with some of the best positional audio I've heard from a VR shooter, short of one issue. your own footsteps, which seem to be off to the side and often freaked me out thinking I had someone right next to me. Outside of this oddity though, the game is very solid with in-game proximity chat also being utilized well and really adding that next level of immersion to team play, with a radio on your shoulder being utilized to communicate with your team when you're out of range. All in all, a great sound mix and one to crank up.
On the right side. And
I'm over here now. Ooh, a sniper.
Shit.
And that brings me to my final thoughts and review score. Pavlov has stood the test of time, being a staple shooter over on PSVR for over 6 years. It is for this reason that I am surprised and disappointed at how bare bones and underdeveloped its matchmaking menu and UI systems are, offering players little guidance to its weapons and game modes, and few control options to play the game the way they want. A total lack of a progression system, a useless single player offering, and a fairly limited map count only further illustrates my concerns here. However, Pavlov on PSVR 2 looks great and is a lot of run and gun shooter fun, as its gunplay is first rate, accented beautifully by a solid sound mix and a wonderful implementation of the DualSense controllers. Popping brain bags is often a blast here, and especially if you can find a group of friends, as Pavlov can often be more a social experience than a hardcore shooter. The VR grid gives Pavlov a 7.5 out of 10. Pavlov has a lot of game modes to keep players busy here, so I hope we see the injection of some new maps, either by the developer or through mod support to keep the party going here. For many PSVR 1 owners moving over to the PSVR 2, I totally get that this might be exactly what you want, so of course take my criticisms as simply wanting a good game to be great. For players looking for an online military shooter, this is still highly recommended. Anyways guys, that's it from us. If you like this video, please hit that like button, subscribe if you want to see more, and of course, as always, I will catch you on my next video.